You're listening to Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
I'm Chance.
I'm Sarah Catherine.
And we are a husband and wife team that runs an environmental education nonprofit focused on connecting students to the environment.
Here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and the environmental movement, and we ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is brought to you by the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in Nevada City, California.
Wild and Scenic presents environmental and adventure films to illustrate the Earth's beauty,
the challenges that our planet faces,
and the work communities worldwide do to protect our home.
Join us as we discover just how these dedicated people are working to protect our planet.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are here at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in Nevada City, California. We're having an absolute blast this weekend talking to some really cool people. And we've got another one sitting here at the table with us. This is Cameron Nielsen. He is the co-director of a film called Washed Ashore.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all.
We're super excited to have you here. So why don't we just jump right into why you are at Wild and Scenic. Tell us a little bit about Washed Ashore.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to be here with you guys at Wild and Scenic. It's been a really amazing film festival so far. Like, I always come here and get super inspired by all the change makers. And yeah, so basically Washed Ashore is a film that I made over the last year with my co-producer, Leigh Hamgartner. And it's about how since 2019, 1 in 4 gray whales have washed ashore dead along the Pacific coast.
Wow,
and
that is a wild number.
Yeah.
1 in 4?
Yeah, it might be larger now, actually. That number was while I was making the film, which was like, I wrapped it up in May. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so how long did it take to film?
So we started researching the film in like September of 2021, and we wrapped it up by May of 2022.
And what was kind of your approach to, I sort of imagine as somebody who is totally not a filmmaker, that you get this kernel of like this number, 1 in 4 gray whales have washed ashore you said since 2019?
Yeah.
Right. And then you say, well, that's a story. And what was your next steps in figuring out how you're going to approach telling the story and trying to understand what was happening?
Yeah. So I guess the way that we went about it was we saw that number and all there was like that number. In a little bit of explanation, but I don't think many people were diving too deep into it. It was like, breaking news, this has happened. And there were like some maybe stories with like the LA Times and whatnot that like went a little farther into it. But we were also like, these creatures are amazing and will play really well on screen, and they're just so charismatic. So we went about it just like finding the scientists that could like speak as the experts for what's going on. And it's a large community, but also small at the same time. They're all working together across borders of Mexico, the US, Canada. And so it's like an international investigation that is like still ongoing.
That just has to be a huge, did you ever look at this and go, well, we've kind of bit off a lot. I hope we can chew it, because like you said, you're a filmmaker based in California, and this is an international issue. And it's not like you can go to your local park and get shots, right? You don't have easy access to B-roll of these organisms. You have to go get on a drone, get on a boat, get underwater, to get something that's going to play on screen. So like, do you have a background in like underwater filming or anything like that? Or was it like, we're going to learn how to do this?
It was just me and my co-producer. We actually produced this like while we were at grad school. So this was very much like an experiment. We're like, okay, this is our thesis project. We're just going to like kind of use all the tools at our disposal. We just kind of like figured out where were going to be the locations where the whales were going to be during when we were going to be able to film it, because we only had like a few months out of the year that we could actually film this. So if we had a longer timeline, we would have loved to go all the way up to Alaska and film up there and stuff. But for our timeline, we filmed in California and then down in Baja, California, Mexico.
That must have been a wild ride.
Yeah, absolutely. So what got you into filmmaking? Is this something you've always been passionate about? Like, how did you end here?
Yeah, so as a teenager coming out of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I chose to go to this kind of experimental school called Quest University, Canada. And it was like a design your own major program. And I showed up there, and it's in this town called Squamish, British Columbia, which is like this beautiful BC town where there's 2 mountain ranges with the river that crushes through them. And I was like, wow, I just want to study wildlife and ecology and understand this. And I was as I was getting into that, I was I'm missing this creative element in my life. So I designed this major around environmental filmmaking, basically. Yeah, so I mean, that was how I originally got into it, was just kind of trial by error. What am I interested in, I guess?
Yeah. And I totally understand that, because personally, I have a degree in biology and theater. Those are my 2 majors in my undergraduate, because I always knew, the other thing I tell people is that I wouldn't have graduated college if I hadn't been doing both. If I only was doing the theater degree, or if I was only doing the hard science degree, I don't think it would have fed all sides of me. But doing the creative with the science together made both of my disciplines stronger. And I always knew that this was the field I wanted to go into, was understanding the science and talking to other people at a very high level about it, but making it accessible to the public, because that's how you affect change, right? You keep talking about this idea of change makers. Change makers are people who can interpret this information and bring it to people so that they can make changes in their lives.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said.
I love the fact that there are more programs coming around that are like that, where you can just kind of develop your own major. I think that's so cool. And for me, as someone who didn't love school in general growing up, I was just okay, I'm ready to be out doing what I want to be doing. I just want to start working. And I was I'm tired of sitting in a classroom. I think the fact now that there's lots of places that do offer yeah, just, do what you want to do. What do you want to do with your life? Choose your own path.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was the right thing for me. I don't know if it's the right thing for everyone, but
it definitely takes the right kind of person that's willing to say yeah, I'm willing to put in the work to figure out what I want to do, instead of following a path that has been preset. And there's it has to be what works for you, right? As an individual, which pathway is going to be the most productive for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to the film itself, what were some of the discoveries that you made throughout this film? And maybe some of the things that you super did not expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated issue to tackle, right? It's we were going about this film that is a mystery that's actively being solved as we're filming it, So it wasn't we could map out okay, this is going to be the answer at the end that we're going to be able to reveal.
Right.
It's we're just kind of unpacking this issue throughout the film. So yeah, it was just, it was surprising in a lot of ways, because everything's kind of a little bit interconnected in this issue. Because the biggest thing that it is pointing towards what's happening is that we have a lot of skinny whales. The whales are malnourished. They make this huge migration down from Alaska in where they feed in the Arctic, because their food survives really well in these colder temperatures. And they starve themselves all the way down to their breeding grounds in San Ignacio lagoons in Baja, California, Mexico. And so they're starving themselves all that way. They eat all their food in the Arctic and then make that journey all the way back. And because the temperatures are warming in the water, the food up there is distributed differently, so they're not getting enough to eat. And so it's causing them to actually want to feed along their migration, which they don't usually do. So they're coming into places like the San Francisco Bay, where they're getting hit by ships and entangled in fishing gear and stuff like that, because it's this chain reaction of things that are happening. Yeah.
Which is, it brings up kind of one of the fundamental concepts in ecology, which is that everything is connected, and small changes, or a series of small changes, are ripple throughout the entire ecosystem, right? So at the core of it, talking about the whales are hungry. They're hungry because their food is distributed differently. It's distributed differently because the water has warmed, and that changes where the small planktonic organisms are going to be hanging out. And so a system that has been relatively stable over the last, however many hundreds of thousands of years, this migration that has happened over and over and over is now disrupted. And so rather than having the security of like, I know that I go to A for food, I have enough food there, and then I go to B for breeding, and then I know that I will have enough fat stored to get back to A to restore myself at the end of the breeding season, that's been disrupted. And so now they're having to look for food in pockets and places that are putting them into new situations that they don't have behavioral adaptations to deal with, right? They don't have to go into bays because there wasn't ship traffic where they were getting their food way up north, right? And so it's just this intensely complex issue that it comes right back to this idea that like we don't have an answer. This isn't it's gonna be a cliffhanger, and it's gonna continue to be a cliffhanger because this is gonna continue to change, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, well said.
Yeah. So speaking of, are you hoping to continue on this project? I know, like you said, are you still in school now?
No, I've been out for about a year now.
Okay. Perfect.
Congratulations.
So yes,
Thanks.
congratulations. So do you hope to continue following this story and continue working on this story, or like what's next for you? Do you have any plans coming up?
Yeah, no, I don't plan on continuing this story. I feel like I kind of put a lot of energy into it, got it out. It's been published by the LA Times. So it's like,
wow,
it's gotten out into the world. I'm going to keep touring it around in festivals. But other than that, it's like really inspired me to keep doing like more wildlife stories and stories about our connection with the environment as humans, and our role in like what's happening that's devastating these amazing creatures, but also like what we can do to help, So I'm going to continue doing stories like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so the whole goal of this podcast is to let our listeners hear from different people working in different aspects of this field of conservation and, the environment, and kind of saying like, oh, well, that's something I'm interested in. Maybe that's something I could do. So something we don't typically get to talk about is like, as a filmmaker, as a creative, how do you go about doing these films? Like, how do you contact people? Do people contact you? How do you get paid? Are you just self-funded? So like, what has that experience been like for you? And for someone who's interested in the same career path, like what kind of could they expect? I know every journey is different, but generally.
I mean, I feel like the journey of any creative is going to be a little bit challenging, and that's part of it. You got to be kind of dedicated to like doing something that you really love, and that it's not always going to be easy. I mean, for this particular project, I did it in grad school. So I was like kind of given this like deadline and a little bit of funding to just like tackle this issue. So it worked in that regard. But now that I'm like out of school, I'm just kind of like having to get creative with like how I'm doing the next projects, like applying to grants and like work for hire stuff for different like news outlets and whatnot. And, just filling in different roles where I can on documentary projects. Yeah.
Really, it kind of boils down to like, hey, I have this set of skills. I can point a camera in a direction and get a good, clean shot. And then I can take that shot and I can weave it together with other shots and audio to tell a story. And as wonderful as it would be to be able to spend all of your time with no question about who's paying for all of this, to do that over and over, it really turns into one of these one for me, one for you situations where it's like, I'm willing to use these skills that I have and continue to hone them, doing stories that are interesting to me, but not my own personal creative project. Like you were saying, hire outs for news organizations and stuff like that. And then that allows you to do the stories that you want to tell, the big stories, kind of when you get the funding available for that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of people end up actually doing like a little commercial work too, to just like help pad the pockets while you can do what you really love doing,
Which really is, padding the pockets means like, yeah, I can buy 2 packs of ramen this week instead of one. I totally get it. Again, coming from a theater background, having lots of friends in the industry, it's like, you do the work because you love it, not because you're going to end up with this giant nest egg by the time you're 80.
Yeah, it's definitely for just the sense of purpose, and for the sense of, you're doing something good for the world or exposing some issue that's happening that you really think needs attention. And Yeah, definitely don't do this for the money. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fulfilling.
Yeah.
You know, and I recently heard on another podcast, they were interviewing an actress, and she said she was at like a talk and someone asked a question like, you know, how do you recommend I get into this, and on and on and on. She was like, well, is there anything besides acting that you could imagine yourself doing in your life? And they were like, no. And she's like, okay, well, that's pretty much my recommendation then, because if there's anything else you would like to be doing, do that, because it's definitely a passion project. It takes a long time to get into and establish yourself. And like sometimes, like you said, you aren't always doing the exact thing you want to be doing. So definitely in the acting, film, environmental sphere, so many places, like a lot of the times I feel like when it comes to passion, like it just takes time.
Do it because you love it.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of this era that we live in, that everybody is carrying both a way to consume film and a way to create film in their pockets all the time. And like we spend hours a day interacting with our phones or computers or tablets or whatever. And like how for you, who was going to school in journalism and film school in this era, like what is the conversation around that for filmmakers, that instead of documentary filmmaking being the exclusive domain of somebody who can get on an expedition to Antarctica, it seems to be becoming more accessible. And I bring this up a little bit because our medium of podcasting, again, that same device that I was just talking about, anybody can start a podcast with your phone and start to have these conversations. And so what is it like to be a filmmaker in this era of massive amount of film consumption and film creation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Like, film is becoming so much more accessible. Like, the cameras are just getting a lot cheaper, and you can pretty much learn a lot of skills by just like going on YouTube. So like that was like how I originally got into filmmaking, was like I was just like watching a ton of YouTube videos and figuring it out.
Yep,
you know?
I've been there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's I definitely took me a while to decide to go back to school. Like I was like, do I really need to do this? But in the end, for me, it was just that film is very much like a network based thing. And I was like, I'm just like going back to school to like, meet other people that are doing what I want to be doing, Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. And, this is very much the same for us, that this is as much about creating it as it is about networking and getting to be in the same room with people who are doing the kinds of work that we want to highlight and lift up. And there's definitely something to be said for spending time with other people who have said, I'm going to dedicate these next 2 years to increasing my skills in this particular media form. And I want to be around other people who are doing that. And I want to dedicate this time to creating something that puts me at my next point, right? It puts me at the next step in this career that I definitely want to follow down that path.
So where can people find Washed Ashore if they want to watch it?
So Washed Ashore is available for free on the LA Times short docs page online. So you can just look up Washed Ashore and LA Times short docs and watch it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. So if you're listening and you'd like to go watch Washed Ashore, scroll down to the show notes. I'm going to go ahead and link it directly so you guys can go from listening to this podcast to watching the film.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Cameron. It was great to meet you.
Yes, really nice to meet you guys too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact, and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something you'd like to learn more about, be sure to let us know.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will help other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to the people working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next time.